Hello everybody! How you guys doing today? So today is going to be another very different video. No lore or anything this time. I am working on another video which will be out someday eventually, I guess. But today I'm just gonna tell you guys some stories. Some stuff that I sort of need to get done. In the fall of 2010, almost 10 years ago at this point, I played a little game called Assassin's Creed 2. So that game takes place during the Italian Renaissance, which is it's an odd time period to set a video game. It's actually a really good game, especially at the time. The thing that I really liked most about it was the main protagonist, Ezio Auditore da Firenze. He was sort of like this Italian Renaissance Indiana Jones, where he was tough, he was smart, he was charming, the ladies loved him. He was a pretty cool guy. And I loved the way he walked. Specifically, his walking animation was just, there was something about it that really just captured me. And so I spent most of my time playing that game just walking through the various cities. Which, like, I guess looking back, I guess that's kind of a bizarre way to spend your time, right? Why would you spend your time just walking in a video game? What's the point of that? It wasn't even one of those, like, walking simulator games. Like, no, it's supposed to be, like, action-based. But I spent my time doing a lot of walking. Because it's such an immersive game where the architecture is ludicrously beautiful. And it's really on point to how those cities would have looked at that time. And the people with the costume design, again, it's very, very on point. And then they'll even speak in Italian, and they'll be like,
Sei un combattente.
That's really, really cool. So I played that game several times, and I loved it to death. It turned into like one of my favorites. And that was the game that sort of made me begin to really enjoy learning about history. So after I played that game, which took place during the Italian Renaissance, I started watching documentaries about the Italian Renaissance. And I learned about, the Medici and Michelangelo. And I learned about the Borgia and the Pazzi. I learned about Niccolo Machiavelli and Cesare. And I watched basically every documentary that I could possibly watch about the Italian Renaissance. And I learned everything that I could possibly learn. And then after I ran out of documentaries about the Italian Renaissance, I started watching documentaries about other things. About the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Aztecs and the Crusaders and the Chinese and India and the Americas. And I watched everything that I could possibly watch on Netflix. And then once I ran out of documentaries, well, that's when I started to buy books, and I started reading books about history. So playing that one game in the fall of 2010, Assassin's Creed 2, inspired me enough to want to learn more about history and to really discover all that I possibly could about it. And had I not played Assassin's Creed 2 at that time, I think it's difficult to predict who I would be today and how well read I would be. I probably wouldn't be. And that video I made a while back about Sekiro and how it relates to Japanese history, I wouldn't have been able to make that video because I wouldn't have known about any of those things, because I would have never read books and I never would have watched documentaries. So that's very interesting to think about. And I'm positive I'm not the only one who's really in that boat. Like I've had teachers in the past, history teachers, who have said, I get so many students in here where they know one obscure character or another from that Assassin's Creed franchise. Like, I had a friend who, wasn't exactly the brightest individual, but he amazingly knew who Cesare Borgia was. And Cesare Borgia is a pretty obscure historical character. Not too many people talking about Cesare these days. So it's interesting the incredible power a video game can have to inspire people to learn and to really grow their own characters. Again, I would not, I really don't know what kind of person I would be today if I didn't play that game and do all the things that game really inspired me to do. Maybe it's something that you kind of just have to experience yourself. But I mean, for those of you who have been subscribers on my channel, you know, you're probably not that different, to be honest. Because, you know, how do we dive into the lore of Bloodborne? We learn about anatomy. We learn about, you know, archaeology. We learn about astronomy. We learn about how blood works. We learn about history and mythology and religion. We learn about Japanese culture, and we learn about philosophy. We learn about all of that to try and figure out what's going on in Bloodborne or Sekiro or Dark Souls or whatever. Because that is exactly what those games demand of us. One of the greatest video games ever made. It's a kid's game. The original Pikmin on the Nintendo GameCube, right? I played that game when I was a wee lad. I was very, very young back then. Oh, the nostalgia is hitting hard again. So the original Pikmin is about a little space gnome who crash lands on an alien planet, and he becomes aware that he only has enough oxygen to survive for 30 days. So the player is told, you have 30 days to fix this character's spaceship. If you don't fix that character's spaceship within 30 days, he's going to run out of oxygen and die. That's a pretty intense message for a kid's game. Again, I was a very, very, very young lad when I played that game, and it's a really, really dark game. So as the player explores more of this alien planet, he discovers these tiny little plant creature things known as Pikmin. And they can be used to solve puzzles and defend against predators. And they can be used to repair the spaceship and find the parts to those and to find the parts to that spaceship. And whenever one of the little Pikmin creatures dies to like a predator or the environment, or just gets left behind on accident at the end of the day, its little ghost spirit will actually rise out of its body when it dies, and then just have this pitiful little face like, why did you leave me behind? Why did you betray me? Why did you fail me? Why? Again, it's a really, really dark kids game. And when I say the player has to do this within 30 days, it's like within 30, it's an actual time limit. If you don't beat the game within an actual time limit, then you lose. Like that's it. It's like, tough luck, pal. You lose. So in order to beat the game, the player really has to learn time management. And the player has to learn resource management. And the player has to learn how to multitask. The player has to learn how to be a manager and how to lead people. And it has to be able to balance sort of growing with working. Has to know when to fight and when to run. The player has to learn how to strategize and how to be a manager. And again, I must emphasize, this is all in a kid's game. I was never able to beat Pikmin, unfortunately. Because I was a kid. I didn't really have time management skills, and I didn't really understand the idea that there would just be an end. Like the game would just end and be like, tough luck, you lose. I didn't really have time management. I couldn't really multitask. I couldn't manage resources. I couldn't do any of those things, and that's why, despite being a kid playing a kid's game, I could not beat it. So I would always run out of time, and then my little gnome character would suffocate and die. And that's very depressing. I even remember having nightmares where I would dream about looking for something in the game, for some kind of like cheat code or some kind of secret that would help me beat the game. Something that I had just overlooked all this time and just hadn't really noticed. It's amazing how I actually remember those dreams after all these years. But yeah, I remember that. And the truth is that the secret is time management and resource management and multitasking. That's what you have to do in order to win the game. Those are the cheat codes. Those are the secrets. And if you can't master those things, you don't win. So if I had had a coach at that time who could have told me, you need to do this, 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 and this. You need to have better time management. You need to get this done by this time, and you need to plan your day ahead, so that way you can actually accomplish these goals. And you need to be able to multitask while you're doing all of that, and you need to know when to grow and when to work. If I had had a coach who could have told me those things, then I probably could have beat the game, and I probably would have expanded my own ability to manage my time in the real world, and to multitask, and to know when to work and when to play, and all of those things. So I'm not really in that camp of people who believes that a video game can have no impact on a person's life, and we should just overlook whatever good thing can come out of it, or whatever harmful thing can come out of it. I believe that a video game can be very, very, very powerful, and very, very educational, and really inspire people in ways that they could not otherwise be inspired. Like I don't think any kid is gonna walk away from Pikmin and say, in order to solve my problems, I need to throw little plant creatures at them. I don't think that's the lesson they're going to take away. I think the lesson they're going to take away is that, yes, I need to manage my time. I need to manage my resources. I need to be able to multitask. I need to plan ahead. I need to strategize. I need to problem solve. So people have this perception that education and video games are antithetical to each other. And to focus on like the video games is very harmful to education. When the truth is that I don't really believe that. I think that's very, very wrong. If I didn't play video games, I wouldn't be as well read as I am today. And I wouldn't be here doing this. I wouldn't be able to make these videos on the ludicrously complicated lore of Bloodborne. I wouldn't be able to make that video about Sekiro and how it relates to Japanese culture and history if I didn't play video games, and if I didn't read about Japanese culture and history. It takes both of those things in order to make that video and enrich my own life as well as other people's lives. So video games have tremendous potential to really affect people's lives in a very, very good way. The fact that they have been viewed this entire time as being antithetical to education is kind of a comic joke to me. It's like how would I explain it? So like with a video game, you can simulate any environment that you could possibly imagine. And how people have looked at that so cynically and only seen a device for shallow entertainment is an enormous disappointment. I can't even begin to express how disappointed I am in that. And how this hasn't been used to the benefit of education, it's just deplorable and an enormous disappointment again. I don't see video games as being the enemy of education. I see video games as being the solution, right? Kids don't really like school, but they love video games. And I'm saying that if we can tailor video games specifically to fit the curriculum, then maybe the curriculum should be tailored to fit these video games. And maybe kids, without even realizing it, will start to learn all by themselves without even realizing that they're being taught. In modern education, it's like there are three primary styles of learning. There's visual, auditory, and like kinesthetic. So like what you see, what you hear, and then what you do, what you feel. And it's my understanding that kinesthetic is kind of the most effective, because you're actually doing it. You're practicing it. Instead of just reading out of a book or listening to a lecture, you're actually doing it. It does make a lot of sense that would be the most effective style of learning. And so again, the idea that with a video game you can simulate any kind of environment that you could possibly imagine. The fact that that hasn't been used to the benefit of education is a comic joke. You tell me, what do you think would be the most effective style of learning for you? Would it be better to just look at like a diagram of, I don't know, Egypt and reading a book? Do you think it would be listening to a lecture? Or do you think it would be better to be dropped into an environment where you can actually experience it firsthand? Or at least you experience that simulation of it. Like, think of Minecraft, the children's game. To play that game, you have to be a little engineer. You have to, it's like people design castles and like drawbridges and like working spaceships. And it's incredible. I don't think that I could do that if I tried it. And yet these kids are very, very capable of doing that. So the hope, the dream, would be that after experiencing Minecraft... my heart! That after experiencing a children's game, those children... Say it! Those... Am I even recording? Those kids will one day grow up and build things. Things like bridges and skyscrapers and other cool things that I cannot today imagine. That is the very dear hope. Alright. Total War. It's an elaborate game of chess where the pieces are always changing, the board is always different, and it isn't necessarily a fair fight. And the way you win is by outsmarting your opponent with a better strategy. That's problem solving. Battlefield. You have to work with your friends in order to beat the other team. And the team that has better synergy is the team that's going to win. So you might have a team over here with 2 people. You might have a team over here with 2 people. They're both attacking each other. They both eliminate one and the other, so you think it's an even fight, right? But this team over here, they have synergy. So why is Siri always interrupting me in the worst possible moments? So he is actually able to revive his teammate, and now it's 2 versus 1, whereas before it was 2 versus 2. Should have been an even match, right? But because this team has better synergy, it's really more like 3 versus 2. Because they kind of have an extra life on their hand. That's called teamwork. Super Smash Brothers. It's a game about watching the opponent, learning what the opponent does, and then trying to predict what they do and put them into a position where they cannot avoid the next serious attack, right? That's planning ahead. That is strategic thinking. Bloodborne is a game all about facing your fears, right? You know, that big, giant, hairy, scary vagina monster over there is pretty scary. Yes, I don't want to go anywhere near it. But, ironically, the safest place to be when fighting that monster is right next to it on its flank. So if you want to win, you have to face your fears and you have to get right up next to it. Unlike a movie or a book or a painting, it's like a game demands something of you. A game demands that you behave in a certain way, learn a certain something or do something, or else lose. And that is very, very, very powerful and motivational. To me, I think that's what makes a video game the most sophisticated form of art in the modern era. Because it's like you have paintings where it's just a static image, right? Which can be beautiful, which can be great to look at. Then you have movies where it's like, well, now the painting starts to move, right? And now there's this story. Well, a video game, it's like, it has all those features of a movie, but now there's player interaction. The player makes choices that might not necessarily affect where the game ends up, but it does affect how the player gets to that end. And so because of that added extra layer of complexity, I think that's what makes video games the most technically sophisticated form of art in the modern era. And it's just like if this can be a painting and be considered art, I really feel like this should be considered art. Is that a hard argument to make? I don't think so. And again, it's like kids love video games. They don't really like school, but they love video games. So why not work with that and use it to our advantage? Why not kind of subversively use video games to educate kids without them realizing that they're being educated? And again, the big point is not necessarily literally what they take away from the video game itself, but to kind of inspire them to go on to do better and greater things. Like, I know Ubisoft made a program with Assassin's Creed Origin where what was it? It was like the player, it was actually for like educational purposes, and it's like the player could actually experience the ancient Egyptian world and actually learn about it in this really new and unique format. And I'm like, thank you, finally we're starting to meet where my expectations hypothetically are. Because I imagine that is probably the future, and that is probably the direction to go in. And the only thing that is keeping us from getting there are, I guess, primarily a lack of funding, and just everyone's rampant cynicism about how harmful a video game can be to a person's life without realizing the benefits of it. You know, so I guess that Assassin's Creed thing it's a bit niche, and it's a bit of an outlier, but I appreciate the fact that it exists, and just looking back on the effects that these things have had on my life, that's why I have such high expectations of the industry, and I kind of refuse to lower them, to be honest. You know, my expectations are way up here because that's where video games have put them. And when I see an old franchise that's shooting for something down here, admittedly, I get disappointed. That is my sin, because again, my expectations are right up here. And it isn't likely that I'm going to lower them. No matter how much, the industry would often like that, I would not. So playing the original Pikmin, you have to learn this thing called time management in order to win. But what about in a game where that barrier called time is a barrier that can be removed if you just throw money at it? It's like the lesson has changed in a direction that I don't think is particularly all that helpful to anyone. Well, I mean, helpful to the company, I guess, but not to the people who are playing the game. And think about it, if Nintendo gave me that option when I was a kid to just spend more money to buy more time, that's the lesson I would have walked away with. I wouldn't reflect back on my past with Pikmin and say, oh, I just had to learn time management and resource management and multitasking. I didn't have to learn any of that. I just needed to spend money. That's how you win the game. I wouldn't have really learned anything great except that I can buy more time. I don't prefer that message, and I hope that when I have kids, that isn't the message that they grew up with. Or like when a video game is pretty honestly kind of mindless, and it's really just built to be a money spending simulator with some kind of gameplay thrown in there. I am disappointed by that, because there's nothing that I can really take away from that and be like, well, now I feel like I have grown as a human being. Now I feel like I have experienced something that was really worth experiencing. Spent a lot of money, but didn't learn anything. Like I was watching Dashi Games the other day. And the poor guy was playing Mario Kart, and he ended up spending like $150 just trying to buy Yoshi. So that's the bubble version of Mario Kart. So, if you're going to buy a game, and the game costs $150, your standards are probably going to be way up here, right? You're saying, okay, if I'm going to spend $150 on a video game, that had better be a very good video game, right? But everyone kind of seems to have this consensus of, no, the Mario Kart game it's a bit closer to down here. So with like these microtransactions and everything, it's like companies are able to keep people's standards low while still raking in a vast fortune because people don't really realize how much money they're actually spending. If the upfront cost was $150, people would have very different demands. But because the upfront cost is free, people are like, yeah, my standards are non-existent, I guess. So that's why, to be perfectly honest, if a company came out today and they said, we're going to charge for a base price $70 for this video game, when the standard across the board is supposed to be $60, I would be ecstatic about that. I honestly would be. Because I know that it would raise people's standards. If you don't know, the difference between Broadway and Hollywood, when a bad review comes out for a Hollywood film, the Hollywood film still has a pretty good chance of making a very large profit. A very, very, very large profit. When a bad review comes out for Broadway, for a Broadway play, that's it. That play is done. Because tickets to a play cost hundreds of dollars. And if there's a bad review for that, people aren't going to see that play because they're like, oh, I'm just going to waste hundreds of dollars. But again, Hollywood tickets to see a movie are much, much cheaper, and so people's standards are much, much lower. So with video games, I would love it if there was kind of the Broadway video games and then the Hollywood video games. No offense to Hollywood. Makes great movies, and makes a lot of them. It's very quantity over quality anyway. So I do kind of wish that in the video game industry, there were these two markets where there are the cheap games that are of lower quality that you can play if you want, or there are the more expensive games that are much higher quality if you want. And then if I were judging what games I would want my kids to play, I would say give me the expensive ones. Give me the ones that are really going to like teach him something, and the ones that are going to have the highest standard. If I grew up with that version of Pikmin where I can just spend money to solve problems, who would I be as a person? I don't know. What would I believe? Where would my expectations of the industry be? Where would my expectations of myself be? Would I really have as much self-confidence? Would I really believe in myself like I do? Or would I just think to myself, if I run into a problem, I just need to spend my parents' money and then the problem will go away? So in economics, I was taught that laws are called the rules of the game, right? Robert Reich, a famous economist, actually refers to the rules of the game exactly as the rules of the game. So to the men on Wall Street, who are arguably the most successful men and women in the world, to them it really is just a game with rules and players and points, and there's a way to win and there's a way to lose, and it's very, very competitive. So to the people who say that you cannot play a video game and leave with real world experience or wisdom or whatever, I think the men and women on Wall Street should probably disagree with you. You know, the men and women who are possibly the most successful men and women in the world, because all they do every single day is play a highly competitive game with each other. They are professionals at that. And when they win a whole lot more than just points on a screen. And that is also exactly what they win. So that's just to give you guys something to think about, right? Have your lives been affected by video games the way mine has? I don't know. I just feel like video games are such an underappreciated, undervalued, and constantly disparaged platform or medium that really has a lot more potential than people give it credit for. And I think we are all worse off for it. I think the fact that it is kind of seen as just shallow, hollow entertainment, and a lot of times that's where the industry's standard is, that disappoints me deeply. And again, I think we are all worse off for that. When I see a video game, I see something that is incredibly, incredibly potentially powerful. Something that can change people's lives. something that can teach people or inspire people in ways that few other things can. Maybe, I don't know. Or maybe that's just my own life. Maybe I'm different. I don't know. But this is just a thought I would like to leave you with. I would advise that if you do desire a better future, I would recommend that your expectations of whatever game you're about to play next be up here, be somewhere around this area as opposed to down here, because your expectations will make a difference. And I would very much like to see things change for the better. Alright, but that's all I'm going to talk about for today. Hopefully this will be up as quickly as possible. So thank you. Goodbye.